The world's most significant financial maneuvers rarely happen in the light of day. They don't happen in press conferences where hard questions are asked, and they certainly don't happen with your best interests in mind. They happen in the shadows, behind heavy oak doors in Manhattan and Toronto, whispered in the corridors of power where money isn't just currency, it's a weapon. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on a transaction that should have sent shockwaves through every neighborhood in North America, yet it was greeted by the mainstream media with a collective shrug. This is the story of the $3.5 billion ghost move. This is the story of Blackstone Real Estate's acquisition of Tricon Residential and why this single deal represents a terminal threat to the concept of home ownership as you know it. We aren't just talking about a change in corporate ownership. We are talking about the strategic capture of 38,000 homes and the final nail in the coffin of the American dream for an entire generation. Let's look at the first sign of this structural takeover, the shocking announcement. In early 2024, Blackstone Real Estate, a name that has become synonymous with the institutionalization of the housing market, announced it would acquire Tricon Residential for $3.5 billion. On the surface, it looks like a standard corporate merger, but the devil is in the details. This was an all-cash transaction. Think about the sheer volume of liquidity required to move $3.5 billion in cash to swallow a competitor whole. Blackstone didn't just buy the company, they paid a significant premium, about 30% over the market price, to ensure that no one else could even get close to the table. But the real brutal truth isn't the price tag, it's the move from public to private. By taking Tricon private, Blackstone is removing it from the prying eyes of the public markets. No more quarterly earnings calls where analysts can ask about rent hikes. No more SEC filings that reveal exactly how much they're squeezing their tenants. They're taking a massive chunk of the housing market and moving it into a black box where transparency goes to die. They paid a premium not just for the houses, but for the silence. This leads us directly into the second sign, the submerged real estate empire. Tricon Residential isn't just another property manager, it is a titan. They control a staggering portfolio of 38,000 single-family rental homes across the United States, along with thousands of multifamily apartments in Canada. When you combine this with Blackstone's existing holdings, you are looking at a concentration of power that is unprecedented in the history of human shelter. What does it mean when a single player, driven solely by the fiduciary duty to maximize returns for the world's wealthiest investors, controls the rooftops of entire zip codes? It means the death of the comparable. In the real estate world, your home's value is determined by what your neighbor sold their house for. But what happens when your neighbor is no longer a human being, but a corporate entity that never intends to sell? What happens when a single landlord owns enough of a neighborhood to dictate the market rate of rent without ever having to worry about competition? This isn't just a monopoly, it's the industrialization of your living room. You are no longer a homeowner or even a tenant in the traditional sense. You are a line item in a private equity spreadsheet, and your rent is a dividend for someone who will never step foot in your town. They are not solving the housing crisis, they are monetizing it. They are ensuring that the ladder to wealth, the equity in a home, is pulled up forever, leaving you on the ground floor, paying for the privilege to stand there. But then we see the third sign, and this is where the corporate gaslighting begins, the promise of expansion. In their official release, Blackstone was quick to pivot to a narrative of benevolence. They promised to maintain Tricon's headquarters in Toronto, and more importantly, they pledged to invest an additional $1 billion to expand the housing supply. They want you to believe that they are the heroes of the housing crisis. They want you to believe that their billions are the only thing standing between us and homelessness. But we have to ask the brutal question, who does this expansion really benefit? When Blackstone builds new homes, they aren't building starter homes for young families to buy and build equity. They are building build-to-rent communities. This is the housing as a service model. They are expanding the supply of rentals, not the supply of ownership. Every $1 billion they invest is $1 billion used to ensure that you stay a perpetual renter. They are building a world where you can subscribe to your lifestyle. Your car is a lease, your music is a subscription, and now your very shelter is a permanent monthly fee that you can never pay off. The fourth sign is perhaps the most chilling: the silent approvals. A deal of this magnitude doesn't just happen overnight. It requires the blessing of shareholders, and more importantly, the silent nod of government regulators. The regulatory bodies are remarkably quiet. Where is the antitrust investigation? Where is the deep dive into how this concentration of ownership affects local economies? The system is designed to facilitate these moves with minimal friction. The regulators speak the same language as the bankers. They see market efficiency where you see an impossible cost of living. There is a profound lack of transparency in how these approvals are granted. Will the true dimension of this deal, its impact on local tax bases, on the availability of homes for first-time buyers, on the political power of corporate landlords, ever be fully exposed before it's too late? History suggests otherwise. The deal will likely move forward under the radar, hidden behind jargon and all-cash efficiency, until one day you wake up and realize that the entire street you live on is owned by the same offshore entity. This brings us to the revelation, the climax of this investigation. The privatization of Tricon Residential by Blackstone is not just a $3.5 billion business deal. It is a strategic pivot in the global economy. It is a massive, coordinated move to concentrate the world's most essential asset, land and shelter, into the hands of a single, private, unaccountable fund. They are redefining the rules of the game while you are still trying to learn the old ones. While the official narrative speaks of supply and investment, the brutal truth is that this is about the concentration of power. It is about the ability to control the price of human existence. When a corporation owns the houses, they own the labor of the people who live in them. They are siphoning the wealth of the middle class, the equity that used to belong to families, and turning it into a permanent stream of cash for Wall Street. They didn't want you to understand the scale of this deal. They didn't want you to see the connection between a billionaire's wire transfer in New York and the fact that you can't outbid that mystery buyer for that 3-bedroom house down the street. They are deleting the American dream in real time, and they are doing it with your own rent money. The question isn't whether this is happening. The documents prove it is. The question is, are you prepared for the consequences of this centralization? We are entering an era where the concept of home is being separated from ownership by a chasm of billions of dollars. When the houses are gone, when the inventory is private, and when the prices are set by an algorithm in a closed room, what is left for the individual? This is the brutal truth they hoped would stay buried in the financial pages of the newspapers. But now you know. Now you see the board. The game is no longer about buying and selling. It's about who owns the map itself. What is your next move in a market where the giants have already decided the outcome? Are we witnessing the final days of the independent homeowner? The centralization of real estate is the great silent crisis of our time. It affects your mobility, your wealth, and your children's future. It's time to stop looking at these as business news and start seeing them as an assault on your financial sovereignty. Leave your comments below. Are you seeing this in your own city? Have you been outbid by a corporate entity? We need to start mapping the footprint of these giants before they finish buying the ground we stand on. Share this, speak out, and remember, the first step to reclaiming the narrative is deconstructing the lies they told you were just business. Understanding the truth is the only way to protect what's yours. Stay vigilant, because the eyes in the sky are not just watching your roof, they are watching the very foundation of your future.